Hey everybody, welcome to this webinar about scaling UDL practices by empowering your teachers with personalized hands-on professional development. I am really excited to bring on a guest today, Tom Driscoll. Tom and I have been working really closely in like the last year or so, Tom, to develop some programs together. And it was really exciting to meet Tom because I recognized how much alignment we had in terms of our priorities for what meaningful technology integration looked like. And it just kind of happened on a happenstance, like typical sort of
Yeah.
EdTech influencer or EdTech, what am I trying to say? Like just
Yeah.
spaces where you reached out to me and said,
Right.
hey, let's connect. And it turned out that there was so much alignment there. So super excited to bring on Tom Driscoll. Tom is the founder
Mhm.
and CEO of EdTech Teacher. And you also have some experience, Tom, working not just as a teacher, but as a school leader as well. What was that like for you, and where did you work?
Right. Thanks, Sam. So first, so excited to be working with you today in this webinar. And we actually, I think it was FETCs when we finally really synced
Yeah.
this year. So that was interesting. That's where a lot of these connections happen, right? Going to events. Like if anybody's going to ISTE coming up soon, we'll both be there just to let us know, reach out. But I think the background and the context that I'm coming in from is I was a social studies teacher for years. I kind of sought out my own professional learning. I started to do some work on the side, but then I became a digital learning director for a regional school district in Rhode Island. And that's when I realized really how complex a lot of this is systemically, like from getting the professional learning together to the technology to the trainers to the budgeting. There's a lot that goes into this. So, but I think the core idea of universal design as an element that can be a foundation for professional learning and ed tech, I think makes a ton of sense. So when I came across Sam's next generation teacher and the work he was doing, it just made so much sense for me to reach out and connect because he does amazing work in that field. At EdTech Teacher, we've really been supporting districts for the past few years on universal design. So we decided to come together and put together a service for schools, and we're going to preview some of that today. But I'll turn it back over to Sam, and we can jump right on in.
Yeah. I just want to say as well that I think it's so important for us to partner and think about bringing some different perspectives. Obviously, you also have the classroom perspective, but really the perspective that you bring about the challenges that school leaders face in implementing some of these ideas at scale. And that is exactly what we're going to be getting into today. So the topic of our webinar today is how we can empower educators to scale UDL with teacher-centered PD. And really, this is going to require looking at professional development through a different lens and applying some strategies for professional development that are not traditional strategies if we're going to be asking teachers to do some non-traditional practices, to start to use some non-traditional practices. So today we're going to look at a few different key objectives. We're going to start by really just exploring and actually exploring over the course of the whole webinar how UDL addresses a central problem in education that has existed but is, I think, getting worse. And we'll look at some very specific things that school leaders can do, any professional developer really, to scale UDL practices at their school. And essentially, that's just getting more teachers to adopt these practices and potentially even winning over some folks that might be hesitant to use technology at all. And then we'll also be looking at some research-backed strategies for delivering effective technology-focused PD. So how do we actually get teachers to use the technology that perhaps you've purchased as a school leader, and you're trying to get people to use it for meaningful learning? We'll look at some strategies to do that. So I want to start here just by talking about the problem. And we know that we have actually an enormous amount of resources right now, lots of money being poured into schools. I believe the latest number that I saw was around $41 billion being spent on EdTech. However, the vast majority of teachers, even in a post COVID environment, are still reporting that they do not feel as though they're getting the support that they need in how to meaningfully and effectively teach with technology. So there's this sort of gap happening right now where now we've had this huge push to get students one-to-one devices, which was something that we really wanted pre-pandemic, and now students have devices. Schools have access to a lot of different technological software and hardware. However, we're still not seeing technology being used for the purpose of meaningful learning at scale. And what we really want to do today is narrow in on this definition. So, this is a quote taken from a research paper called, I know Tom's a little bit in front of it right there, but called Exploring Teachers' Technology Integration Through Self-Efficacy. And they're talking kind of more generally in terms of the need to promote student-centered learning and powerful 21st century learning. And we're going to kind of refine that a little bit to say that the technology exists to implement universal design for learning. However, we're not seeing that yet at scale. And so we want to help you see some ways and learn some ways that you could make that happen, because we actually live in a very exciting time when the possibilities to make universal design for learning a reality in schools across the country, that is something that is within our grasp. So I put together a little graphic here, Tom, showing one size fits all instruction. And I know this is actually the first time that you've seen this, but I'm curious, when you see this, kind of what comes to mind? What are your thoughts in terms of what this instructional model looks like in practice?
Right. So it's the whole group directed instruction that still is the predominant mode of instruction in at least in secondary, but maybe K-12. And I've seen a graphic floating around similar to this where it's the same, but every desk has a laptop on it. Right. And it's like, hey,
Right.
technology infused. Well, it's still the same thing. It's just now you throw a laptop on every desk that you're teaching everybody the same thing at the same time, but now with a laptop. So um, I think that is still relatively pervasive as an instructional model. And it's one that works for some kids some of the time, but it doesn't work for all kids all the time. So I think that that's really important that we shift away from focusing on this approach.
Yeah. Yeah, and really the core issue with this model of instruction is that it just does not account for the truth of learner variability. So, although we might have this kind of dream that yes, we're going to stand in front of the class, we're going to be able to deliver instruction that is going to reach every student. Every teacher knows that the reality is much different, right? So, we have a class that looks more like this. So, yes, you do have the
Mhm.
students for which the model works, represented by the raised hands and the engagement. And sometimes I know I used to fool myself and think, oh, the handful of students that are raising their hand, that means that I'm doing the right thing, right? And yet I have some students who are absent, some students who don't know what to do, some students are just kind of laid back and hanging out, students are kind of bored, falling asleep, right? So in actuality, there's a wide range of students. And this, of course, doesn't even account for the true variability that exists among students. And this is obviously problematic for learners, and it's problematic for teachers as well. It causes a lot of stress to try to deliver instruction in this one size fits all model. And I know something that comes up a lot is, is this something new? No, it's definitely not new. One size fits all instruction has always been problematic, and people have been advocating for a shift in that model for a long time. But as we're seeing students, or young people, I should say, um, move away from this notion that even I had as a kid, that I had to get learning from a teacher, right? They don't grow up in that kind of world. They grow up in a world where really they can get their personalized needs met through all this individualized technology. That's their whole experience of what the world is like. And so it's going to be even harder to kind of sit in this really uniform environment and just like take learning in a passive way. So yes, in many ways, the modern world has kind of exacerbated this problem and made it something that I think is, we're at a point where we can't ignore the issue. Now, this is another principle that is also not new, but was highlighted in the book, The End of Average, which I highly recommend everybody checks out. It's by Todd Rose. And this is a wonderful graphic depiction that Katie Novak created, adapting a graphic that's in that book that is describing this idea of the jaggedness principle. And I know this is something that you brought up in another webinar, Tom. And so I was curious if you could explain what's going on here.
Right, and I fully support that research that you just referenced. The End of Average is a fantastic book. Everything Katie Novak does is great, frankly, on UDL. And the reference here that is my reference point is we did some work with one of our partners, Digital Promise. Huge shout out to them. They do amazing work on this front. But they had us, when I was still in Bristol Warren, they had us work with their learner variability team. And they showed us that a lot of the cognitive science and the research behind this shows that there is no such thing as this one linear progression of any competency. It just doesn't happen that way. That's not how people learn. And this is different from the learning styles, right? So if you hear the idea of like different learning styles, like that theory was largely debunked. Even the person that created it kind of admits that. However, when you learn a competency, it's more like this, right? So you have jagged levels of understanding for all those different sub skills, and then some people even say it's more like looking at Swiss cheese. Like you're going to have holes and gaps in your knowledge and skills in all these different parts of the domain. And what happens is, depending on where those gaps are, that's going to influence other things that the students learn. So we're learning so much about how people learn from a cognitive science standpoint. However, if you're just, if you're a teacher looking at this, how does that become actionable? Like, so when I was in my social studies classes, if I saw something like this, my first question would be like, all right, well, student B on the right has a, really low factor 3, for instance. How can I now help address that? And I think that's where UDL comes into place, is that it's going to give you like a mindset and some strategies for how to address this jaggedness of understanding and competencies for students across all different domains.
Yeah. And really, once we acknowledge what in many ways is a common sense truth that variability exists, that people are not the same and bring different strengths and areas of growth to different circumstances as well, then we have to look at a model like UDL that shows us a pathway for how we can create learning experiences that are really designed for the purpose of learner variability. And that is essentially what the UDL framework is intended to do. So UDL, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into looking at some practices that you can adopt in professional development. But UDL is actually adapted from an idea that originated in architecture, universal design and architecture, which emerged from disabilities movement to help make public spaces more accessible to people. And CAS took that idea and they built a framework. This is the many iterations later, and they're working on another one right now to essentially provide a menu board for how teachers can approach lesson design through the lens of how we can account for this reality of learner variability. Now, I will acknowledge that a central problem, in fact, I would say a barrier to UDL implementation, is that looking at the framework itself, and this is my opinion, that it can be a little bit confusing. It can be a little bit overwhelming. It can feel difficult to know where to start. And CAS is actually very explicit about not wanting to tell people where they should start because it's intended to be a menu board. But that sort of wide open choice, I think, can be a little bit intimidating and can also potentially act as a barrier to implementation. Like, what do I do with this particular information? And so that's where we want to look at how we can guide folks to make use of this in a more effective way. So we're going to look at this question now of essentially how a professional developer can help teachers implement UDL so that we can take the guidance from CAST and apply it to not just one classroom, but to try to get buy-in across numerous teachers. And in fact, to be able to essentially implement that the model, the UDL model, across an entire school site. And there are some research-backed strategies that can help you do this. So one is to make sure that everybody has a clear vision and a shared understanding of UDL. And this is not just understanding the framework, but actually understanding what the mindset of UDL is, because UDL is actually really about having a mindset as opposed to like it's not a prescriptive model. You must do this and that thing. And another is to promote co-ownership through discovery-based learning. So there's a lot of research out there that shows that people are just inherently resistant to the idea of change, especially if you tell them what to do. And so in order to elicit change, we really have to get people to co-construct that and kind of come to an understanding on their own that change is needed and how that change might happen. And one very specific way that we can do this is through using hands-on learning to increase self-efficacy. So there's also a lot of research out there that shows that self-efficacy is the number one predictor to whether or not teachers will be integrating technology for the purpose of meaningful learning. And so if you don't feel confident and competent using technology, you're just not going to use it. And that also kind of makes inherent sense. And another way we can reduce friction is by providing ready-to-go resources. So oftentimes I think in PD, there can be an inclination to deliver a lot of information, but then still put a lot of onus on the teacher to have to make materials and go out and kind of connect a lot of dots. So one way that you can resist or reduce the friction to that, any kind of resistance to adopting the practice, is to just provide people with some templates and ready to go resources to make it as easy as possible. So what we put together here is a quick model that is intending to really incorporate all of these together, because UDL is a holistic model. These strategies can be applied holistically to show how you might approach a professional development session in a way that can help get more people on board to use UDL. So what I would start with, I would always model the practice of presenting an inquiry-based question and letting teachers know that they're essentially going to be exploring this inquiry-based question. And by the end, they'll create some sort of artifact and reflect on their understanding of this inquiry-based question. And so if one of the first key strategies is to have a clear understanding of the vision of UDL, then it would be a great idea to open this up to everyone. So rather than just dictating that, to open it up so it becomes an exploratory question. What does it actually mean to adopt a UDL mindset? What is UDL all about? So one way that you can do this to start is with a very simple engage type activity where you're essentially allowing people to brain dump what they already know. So this is a Padlet board, and you can encourage people to use some of the different tools and things like that on Padlets, and not just to post with text, but also to post with an image, a GIF, or a drawing, depending on their level of experience. And then you can also do some small things to support teachers so that we know that there are going to be some folks that know how to use the tool and some who don't know how to use the tool. So you can just embed a tutorial, and the tutorials we've built actually for our program are custom built tutorials that walk people through how to use different apps. Have you seen IRAD, Tom? It's
No, I have
awesome.
not.
It's awesome. And what's really cool about this version of IRAD is that what I'm going to show you is actually mapped onto my Padlet account. So this is actually walking me through the steps of how to do something within my account. So I'm going to hit click live, you'll see it's actually in Padlet. And then this is our co-founder, Tom Gibson. So what he's doing here is actually walking you through the steps. And so if you're unsure how to do that, then you can actually click on the steps. And this is actually going to, like, you're actually doing this in the program. And then you learn how to do all the steps that would be required to use this particular program in the program itself while you're actually completing the activity. So it's pretty cool, interactive tutorial as opposed to having somebody just watch like a passive tutorial. And this is one small way that we can start to also empower people with some skills. So if I were doing this activity and somebody already knew how to post a text response but didn't know how to do a GIF, I would try to push them to do that, suggest they go through the tutorial so that they can learn how to do that process. Now, after we've come back, all shared what we know, rather than just telling folks, okay, now here's what a UDL mindset is, I would create a type of exploratory activity. And I would, it's really important, again, when you're trying to get people to change behavior, to connect the behavior that you're trying to get people to do to something that they already know and something that they already agree with. And so one thing that I would do here is potentially have folks look at some different images. So on the left, we're looking at an image with some, looks like some ramps and stairs kind of all built together, ramp that's overlaid on top of some stairs, and then a person looking at a set of stairs. And then I would actually create an activity in a program like Jamboard. And you can see this is an activity that I did with teachers in the past, where they are practicing the See, Think, Wonder thinking routine, which is a Project Zero thinking routine. And they are sharing what they see, think, and wonder about the different images. So this one is the see, the think, and the wonder. And so the idea here is to get people to process and make meaning of these images, and then to also kind of start to elicit some questions like, maybe even right now you're thinking the same, like, why are we looking at images of stairs and ramps and things like that? So the purpose is to elicit that curiosity, to start to build schema for folks so that they have a stronger understanding when you do actually get to the part where you're going to do some explanation. And then you'll also notice that because I created an activity for Jamboard, this gives people an opportunity to have some authentic practice in an application using a program, and using an instructional strategy here, See, Think, Wonder, that they could potentially use with students as well. So after I had them do some exploratory type activity, which again is really getting to that idea of discovery-based learning, you're trying to get people to come to an understanding on their own, right? To not just have you be the one that is explain and tell you, right, what they should be doing without, you ever having to tell them what they need to do. Then you can fill in with some more explicit instruction. Again, whenever possible, I would make an effort to try to model that using an application you would want students, or you would want them to be using with students. So in this case, this is an Edpuzzle video where I added interactive questions to a John Spencer video about universal design for learning. Great video. John Spencer's awesome. And the teachers can now actually get the experience of watching a video, seeing how a video has embedded captions, how it has embedded check for understanding questions that they're going to answer as they're going through the video. And at the same time, they're learning about universal design for learning. Now, following that kind of direct explanation of UDL, I can now give my explanation of why we did this. And so I'll go ahead and explain that to you all now, to also help you all see this connection that exists between universal design for architecture and universal design for learning. So at the top, right, we see a guy in a wheelchair. Actually, I'm curious, Tom, so what do you see in that picture? Like, what stands out to you in the one that's up here at the top for a barrier to access?
Yeah, the first thing that comes out is just how poorly designed this is, for accessibility,
Yep.
and that's that's I would hope like when we do this, that would be one of the things that teachers pick out is like that was not designed for everybody in mind, which I think
Yep.
is the perfect like on ramp for lack, no pun intended, but like that's going to get them to the point of this in education, right? So I think
Exactly.
that's a great visual to prepare people if you're working with staff.
Exactly. Yeah. And then this picture in the left-hand corner is always the one that, I show it to teachers and they're kind of trying to figure out what is that and what that represents. What do you see there? I'm curious, Tom, when you look at that picture.
Uh, it almost looks like someone tried to retrofit stairs so that it could be a ramp, but in a very
Exactly.
unsafe way.
Exactly. Yeah, no, in a way that's maybe not so effective. And then and on this last one, what do you see there, Tom?
Yeah, it's so everybody can get up the stairs regardless of whether they need a wheelchair or regular stairs. And I'm going to take a second. The story I shared in my last webinar is exactly about this, but I use a reference for the Northeast, right? So I'm a New Englander, so I use the snow reference. And the stories, the students are at the front of the building. There was a snowstorm, and the person at the school is shoveling the stairs, and there's a kid in a wheelchair, and they're like, "Oh, can you do the ramp?" And he's like, "I'll do the ramp after." And the kid's like, "Well, if you do the ramp first, we can all go up the ramp, right? Then I won't have to wait, right?" So the whole point is like if you design for the most accessibility first, it's not just for the people that need it; it could help everybody, right? And I think that's another thing you can point out with a visual that focuses on architecture to make that jump to, hey, designing things for all, and that application towards education is really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the idea here, again, I really wouldn't have to provide a lot of explanation. You just did it, right? And that's the whole point, that
Mhm.
we have a situation
Right.
that's been sort of inherently constructed to leave people out. We have a situation where people have tried to rectify that by putting a ramp on after the fact, right? And oftentimes I'll hear that a bit of a confusion about the difference between differentiation and universal design for learning. And I think this helps illustrate it, that this is like differentiation. We create something and we differentiate afterwards by saying, okay, we're going to lay a ramp on top of something that we already created because we realize that not everybody can access what we originally created. So we're going to create a kind of version of that. Now, it's not terrible that we did that, but perhaps better if we can actually create that proactively in our initial design. And the great thing about teaching is that it's not architecture, like it's not a permanent building. It's something we're constantly, continually building on an ongoing basis. Now, if we look at this in education, we can imagine a barrier to access. So instead of a person sitting in front of a staircase or escalator that they can't get up, we can imagine a student that's having a difficulty reading, so they can't access the curriculum. Now, a common response to this, a differentiation based response, would be to provide a student with a tool, and you could even do this in technology, that allows them to access it. So we recognize that the student is not able to read, so we're going to come in and we're going to provide that student with some mechanism to help them. And then there's another approach, which is the proactive initial design. And in this one, you can see that essentially what the teacher has done is they have anticipated some students are just going to struggle with accessing text. And so we're going to allow certain students to access that, through a tablet. Maybe some students still are going to use like the pencil and paper method. And then we're going to have some students reading potentially collaboratively, student working independently on a computer, maybe using text to speech. So this is just accounting for the fact that we can anticipate there's going to be a barrier that some students are not going to be able to access the text. And really, that's what universal design for learning is about. It's about how we can anticipate barriers that frequently come up and try to build the solutions to those barriers directly into our lesson design, just like an architect did when they created a building that had a ramp and stairs together. Now, just really quickly, I can show, a couple of other things I've done. I actually don't know why all my comments are not showing up here because this is a real activity, but I wanted to teach people about some different tools and how you could use things like a voice comment. And so this is another activity where now, okay, you just learned about what universal design for learning is. Now you can share what are some connections you have between that concept and your own life. What are some challenges? So, are there things that you actually want to challenge about what you just learned that you want to potentially argue with or bring up as a problem? What are some changes in attitude, thinking, et cetera, that the text or the video is suggesting that you make? And then what are some important concepts you're still holding on to? So this is the practice of getting people to synthesize, to make connections, to try to make that learning sticky for themselves while also practicing another tool. And depending on how advanced folks are, again, you can model. So I will often, for example, model how to do a voice comment so that people can learn that voice commenting tool so that then they can go back and actually use that with their students and teach their students how to use a voice commenting tool. And then I would have them still process what they just learned by creating an authentic artifact. And again, this is modeling for them how they could do this with their students. We could have them do choose here from doing something like I used to think, now I think, or a 6-word summary about what they learned about UDL. I've created some templates here. So when they click on these, they'll just get the template. They don't have to create it from scratch. If they want to, they can click here. They can watch a tutorial to learn how to use the program that we're learning. So again, just kind of offering some of those embedded scaffolds while also giving them the opportunity to practice, authentically practice, build their self-efficacy using a tool and elevate their understanding of what UDL means. And then at the end, all the things I want them to do as students, I'm ultimately going to have them do as well. So you can see here, I had different folks in a PD go through and actually create these graphics and then post them and share what they liked about each other's creations. And then I would bring it back to ultimately, what are we doing, right? So I would have a higher level metacognitive conversation. And I'm going to put you on the spot right now, Tom, to see, what you think. So I'd want to have a reflective conversation about what strategies I just used to help reduce barriers to learning. So it's, obviously I'm not going to implement the full UDL framework, but I'm curious, what did you see in that lesson that we just did that perhaps reduced some friction for you to be able to learn about UDL if you were my student, Tom?
Right. I think one was that you gave multiple options for accessing the content that you were teaching, right? So you have some video tutorials, you have some embedded walkthroughs. And I think that um, the modeling the different tools and formats during it is also modeling the different types of UDL strategies that you can then implement later, right? So I think that that's part of it. And then the other part too is that when you designed the activities, it was really about kind of peak curiosity, interest, and being active and engaged from the beginning, right? And I think that that idea of engagement, like that's a big part of the UDL model, is what are the different ways that we can engage students. And I was just looking at some of the comments. Looks like Laureen's, she mentioned something like, imagine everybody actually paying attention during class, right? And that's a great comment. And I think that that is one of the biggest struggles we face. I faced it when I was teaching, is how can we provide um, different ways to engage students, because not every student's going to be engaged by the same type of thing. Like I did a gamification thing one year where I gamified my entire curriculum, and some kids thought it was amazing and other kids thought like, I'm not into this. Right. So, but like designing that other option to engage students that maybe aren't into something like gamification. I'm kind of going on a rant here, but the whole point
Yeah.
was that you provided a lot of those different ways to learn, even as you were teaching about UDL.
Yeah, I think something that is so often ignored in professional development is this idea too that exactly what you're saying about multiple means of engagement, but this idea that we need to also be providing our learners with relevant, interesting content. The content itself is
Right.
sometimes dry, or we're practicing how to use tools and things like that in a vacuum. And so to whatever extent uh, you all can get or plan professional development if you're doing that for your teachers, to plan professional development using content and material that is relevant and interesting to your audience. And so to get people to be talking about some of the key problems that they're facing in education and kind of start there, key problems they're facing in their classroom, and have them looking at resources pertaining to that. That's also going to go a long way to helping with buy-in and ultimately adoption of these ideas. And then very last thing that I would have folks do, I'm always bringing it back. So universal design for learning is very much a constructivist model where we're still collaboratively building understanding together. And so at this point, we could have a conversation about how might you reduce learning barriers when planning your own lessons. And notice I haven't shown the UDL framework yet at all, right? So we would actually try to see just organically, what can we organically generate as ideas for our own lessons. And then, maybe in the next session, we're going to actually look at the framework and look at how, what my job could be would be to organize some of the ideas that people came up with and look and map that across UDL and say, like, look, you all already are thinking about lots of this stuff. So again, just this idea that we want people to come up with the ideas on their own and think about how, and kind of, I don't want to say a trick, right? Because that sounds that doesn't sound right, but it is almost kind of tricking somebody into thinking that they came up with that, right? And that's just been proven again and again to be so key to getting people to changing behavior and to adopting new practices. And just one other thing to say about it as well is that this approach, where you're really trying to take a more discovery-based, hands-on approach, can support the folks who are reluctant to even adopt technology in the first place, because it's not a technology-first approach. It's really looking at what is the technology going to help us achieve. And if we can come up with a shared understanding about our values, which is much less difficult to get to. Like, we agree that we should be trying to reach as many learners as possible. We agree that active participation is a positive thing, things like that. Once you can get people to collectively agree to those base values, those shared values, then you can start to explore the strategies that help us all achieve that, as opposed to the other way around. Like, let's look at this tool and, how you must start using this tool. All right. So Tom and I came together to bring these ideas together and design a program that we'd love to share with you all called Next Generation Teacher Plus. And so I'm going to hop over to our site here. That you can also visit this at nextgenerationteacherplus.com. I'll drop this in to the comments to check it out. So like Tom was mentioning, he approached me after seeing Next Generation Teacher, which at this point is a fully asynchronous program. And Tom and the folks over there at EdTech Teacher have been doing a lot of in-person professional development. And I know, Tom, you all wanted something for folks to do asynchronously. And something that really appealed to me about the work that they were doing over at EdTech Teacher was filling in a lot of the work that, as a 3-person company, we're not able to do at New EdTech Classroom, which is to provide some of the ongoing support. And so we spent a lot of time, actually worked with a researcher there as well at EdTech Teacher, and she turned me on to some great literature as well, and did a lot of looking into best practices and a lot of learning about what makes for effective professional development. And we've designed this program. So want to share a little bit about it with you all. I'm curious, I'm going to scroll down and kind of show the overall process here, Tom, but what are you excited about this program and how it might start actually making an impact on changing practice?
Right. So something that I'm so excited about is that we're providing what we know works best in professional learning sessions. It's that idea of ongoing customized support for schools and for teachers throughout the year and in multiple formats. So it's some live instruction, it's on site with an instructor, but it's also asynchronous, so you can learn at your own time. There's live coaching sessions in the middle, and everything. I mean, EdTech has been doing this since 2008, and the feedback that we get is that it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't just PD that was done to us. The school district, the teachers are part of it. Like we're learning together, and we work with schools specifically to do that. Like, how can we become a part of what your goals are and help you achieve them, amplified by technology? And then the team over at New EdTech Classroom and Sam, like their online modules are top notch. They're professional. They're the best I've seen out there. And I also really appreciate the embedded tutorials where you're actually doing it in the app while you're getting feedback, right? And that's something I haven't seen before. So that really piqued my interest. So I was very excited to kind of combine the strengths of both of our companies to create this custom product for schools.
Yeah, and we created a visual of what that looks like, you know. So we're going to start with a needs assessment, really modeling the practices that you one would do to personalize instruction for students as well. That is a research back practice to understand what a school needs, and build a program from that, as opposed to coming in with a prescriptive model, to really look at how to build a custom plan. And then, yeah, providing that ongoing support that's going to combine on-site workshops, like Tom mentioned, and online modules that schools will be able to pick which ones fit best with their goals, and also with the levels that their teachers are at. And we have that tool for you as well. So we have quizzes, essentially little mini pre-assessments that are non-evaluative, that teachers can take to help them basically determine what, based on where I am, let's say we're all working together on a strategy, could be something like active participation, that we're actually still going to differentiate within that. So somebody may have no practice doing that. And I think in the past, the way PD I don't think the way PD tends to work is that everybody still kind of has to practice the same thing, but we're constructing this so that, yes, we're all working on something together, but you're still going to get some differentiated pathways within that, so that based on your skill, there's always something you can do to build and accelerate. And so really looking for how we can personalize professional learning for teachers as well. And there's also coaching and support, which is backed by research, and also this idea of community and being able to share. So we have a robust community aspect to our program as well. And so I mentioned, you know, the importance of sharing resources. We have basically a template for everything that we suggest people do, so that it doesn't have to be something where you're recreating the wheel. So it's something you can take, you can revise. We also have a community of folks that are sharing the stuff they're making, so that you can take that and build upon that as well. So yeah, I agree, Tom. Just really excited to, I think, put together something that is needed, something that I've seen in the research for a long time, calling for programs like this. And I think it, you know, it requires collaboration, right? Like the strengths of your company and the strengths of my company to put something like this together. And so, yeah, if you're out there listening, I know obviously we have a lot of teachers on who in our audience, right, for New EdTech Classroom that are coming and checking us out, and watching our videos. If you are interested in bringing this to your school, we have a link at the bottom, and actually I'll share that too directly in here. So if you go to our Next Generation Teacher Plus page, but then you can also, I'll drop this in right here. We will hop on a call. We will chat with your whoever it is that we need to chat with, about basically looking at what might a custom plan be. So this is something we do totally free of charge. We'll hop on and just evaluate, you know, and see whether or not this seems like a program that would be a good fit for you and your school. So yeah, if you are just a teacher on the call, definitely want to encourage you, or on the webinar, it's not a call, I want to encourage you to chat with your school leaders. You definitely have a lot more say in what professional development opportunities come to your school than maybe you think. I know I certainly discovered that for myself later on. And so if you're somebody who has either gone through the program yourself as an individual, or you are just inspired and excited about it, I would encourage you to bring it to your school leaders and have us hop on a call with them and see how we can help.
Actually, yeah, and a couple other points there is if you are in a school district where you need like professional development hours, like PDPs or things like that, or if you're looking to get graduate credits, you are eligible for 3 graduate credits from a university in our region, but we worked with a lot of schools where it can transfer to other schools. Um, the point here is that it's a well vetted research backed program that in states have approved us as providers. So I know, for instance, like in New Jersey, we had to get on some list of an approved provider, and in Chicago, and so we've been approved by just about every state that requires it. So if any of those questions come up, that's some of the context. But again, you have a lot of power as an educator to advocate for certain professional learning experiences. Let us know who we can talk to. And then the last piece that always comes up is, funding. If you're in a school district that perhaps funding's tight, we are very well versed in how you can use title funding for this type of program. So the U.S. Department of Education put out a guide that we've combed through that we can provide to your district, where you can use Title II and Title IV, and in some cases other federal funding for technology related professional learning experiences such as this. So there are ways that we could also work with your school to help find you the funding needed for a program like this.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and it, I think, points to a couple of things that are really exciting to me about this. One is that I really do not believe, I strongly believe individual teachers should not be paying for their own professional development. And so to have this, funded through a schools and be an opportunity that you can participate in without having it, impact you personally. And then the idea also that really for this type of change to happen, yes, it can happen classroom by classroom. However, the power of having a collective effort as a whole school to understanding these concepts, to working together, to build archives of resources, share best ideas and practices, and be able to learn ideas, go out and actually implement them and try them, and then come back and get feedback and talk about what's challenging and continue to build skills collectively as a group, is just incredibly powerful, and frankly is what we're going to need as an education system to really make the shift to student-centered learning, away from one-size-fits-all instruction, and truly adopt the ideas behind universal design for learning. So we hope to see you on a call, or to chat with one of your school leaders on a call. And as always, if you have a question, you can contact us. So you can contact me at contact@newedtechclassroom.com. And Tom, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way, you can go right to edtechteacher.org. There's a contact us button right on the top right there. And like you said, we'd love to chat with you guys. So feel free to reach out anytime on social, through our websites, and or book a consultation through the link that Sam just shared.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to more of these conversations with you and getting in depth with some of this stuff in the future, Tom. So hopefully this is not the last, but the first of many. And I want to just thank you for coming on to the channel and for co-hosting this webinar with me. And everybody, thanks for watching. If you're watching this live, thanks so much for coming on live. And if you're watching the recorded version and you have a question, drop it into the comments and we'll be sure to answer it. All right, everybody, keep an eye out for upcoming content. We got a lot of exciting stuff for Next Generation Teacher and New EdTech Classroom. Going to start getting into some stuff related to AI and personal knowledge management over the summer. So I'm really excited about that and can't wait to share all of that with you soon. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.